dragging him off. It's for me, one of the most scary situations is mob rule. When mobs are around, there's no control. Things are very, very dangerous. I would always much rather be at a front line of a military battle than ever be attacked by a mob. These are just different scenes from the front lines between the pro and anti-Mubarak demonstrators. This woman was looking for her lost child, who was arrested by the pro-Mubarak forces, and she was unable to find him. And again, this is sort of this kind of, they're fighting with firecrackers, stones, and hand-to-hand. So the anti-Mubarak people are in the foreground, and the pro-Mubarak people are across, and they were eventually able to push them off. And this was like the last major battle that happened at night. And you can see on the right of the fire, they had corrugated, the anti-Mubarak people had corrugated aluminum, and they were moving forward through the bonfires and through being attacked also by, at this point, with handguns, until they were able to push the pro-Mubarak people out. And Mubarak came on television to speak. These are the demonstrators reacting to the speech, and then Mubarak stepped down. It really was, for me, an amazing experience to witness something happening in such a quick period of time, and to realize, given the importance of Egypt in the Middle East, in the hope that this was going to have a better effect than what we have today. But I think it's very interesting to understand through the combination of now, obviously, of social media, but also I think the fact that all these journalists were covering this story and keeping the story alive was extremely important in helping them get the results that they had at that time. Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Lynsey Addario.
Thank you all for coming. I am going to go right into the photographs. In January, I was in Iraq on assignment for National Geographic when all of the uprisings began. I was really frustrated that I couldn't go to Egypt and kept begging to be pulled off assignment, but I couldn't. So I watched TV incessantly, and after Iraq, I had to go to Afghanistan for another assignment. And again, I was watching Mubarak fall on TV, something that for me was incredibly painful. By the time I was finished in Afghanistan, I was sent to Bahrain. When I went to Bahrain, I was looking for the equivalent of Tahrir Square. Many people were gathered in the square, and I spent 4 days in Bahrain before being pulled out to go to Libya. So these are the series of images out of order. So by the time I got to Bahrain, I wanted to find the equivalent of Tahrir Square. I went, and there were thousands of people gathered in the square. And in a sense, it was sort of anticlimactic because I knew that Egypt had such historical weight, and I kept thinking, well, does Bahrain matter? And I kept saying, well, yes, of course. This is in the wave of all the uprisings, and I really tried to work it and to make it look like it was something like Egypt. But you know, the reality is that these uprisings it doesn't matter the scale they're on, they come in societies where they have never had the right to protest. So even if there are 100 people in the square, that's 100 more than there ever was historically. So it does have weight. This is a pro-government protest. They got very angry because there were so many people in the square that they called for their own protest, the Bahrain government. I think as a journalist, you cover as much as you can, both sides. Some countries you have access to both sides, some places you don't. People were killed during the uprising in Bahrain. They continue to be killed. And these are celebrations as the release of political prisoners. I went to Libya on the 26th of February and entered Benghazi. This is the day I arrived in Libya. There were people celebrating outside of the courthouse. They were still cleaning up the courthouse and starting a parallel government. When I entered Libya, I thought it would be something akin to the fall of Saddam in Iraq. I was expecting to go in and watch a series of towns fall. And with that, and I covered the fall of Saddam in Iraq in 2003 and stayed there until 2004. And with that, there are things that you look for as a photographer. Government buildings that were off limits, intelligence offices, prisons. There are places where you find documents. It's very exciting to cover the fall of a regime because most of these regimes were completely closed off. So you find people who go, it becomes a sort of tourism to go and visit these government offices. This is the headquarters in Benghazi. About a week after I arrived, the rebels started calling for volunteers and training people. And it was clear that they had no experience at all. A lot of them were doctors, engineers. They had never fought before. There were a lot of people trying to flee Libya, a lot of Africans who had been brought in to work, and their passports were taken when they arrived and not given back by their employers. So they were stuck in Libya when the fighting was going on. People were desperate to get out, and there were very few ships taking people out of Benghazi. We started moving forward in the beginning of March towards the front line. We heard that the fighting had come closer, and a handful of journalists wanted to see the fighting and to see what was going on. We traveled in groups. It was very dangerous, and often it's hard to find a driver who will go forward. So many journalists in these situations travel together for safety. Towns were falling, and they would bring out pictures of Gaddafi and shoot them and celebrate. And it was very similar to the fall of Saddam in that sense. It's incredibly euphoric. This is a day where there was very heavy fighting going on the front line, and the way it was situated is there was one road that sort of cut through the desert. It's the coastal road, and Gaddafi's troops were on the western edge, and the rebels were coming from the east. And the first day, this is one of the first days we really were engaged in fighting and covering the fighting. And Gaddafi's troops sent in, there were airstrikes on this particular day, and there was tank fire coming in, mortar fire, and in this moment there was a helicopter that swooped in over us and actually sprayed machine gun fire all around us. And I didn't realize how close they were. I was sort of crouched behind a car with John Moore, a colleague, a photographer for Getty. And all of these soldiers had nothing but their AKs to try and shoot back at a helicopter. I mean, it was pretty crazy. This is the rebels fighting along that one road. And if you can see, the terrain is very flat, so there are very few places to hide. This is on another day with a lot of fighting. Again, these are all the smoke you see is artillery coming in, tank fire. Often we didn't know what it was coming in. We were always looking for cover and a place to hide. Shrubs don't provide any protection, so we use those cement silos to sort of crawl inside and try and work from inside of there. Is there any way to make that thing go away? These are, the rebels often fled the minute the fighting got close, and they were terrified. I've covered wars in the past. I've been to Afghanistan, Iraq, Congo, Darfur, covered the ceasefire for the Lebanon-Israel war, and often the military, the U.S. military, you wouldn't see this sight very often. They don't flee in the middle of a battle. There were many wounded and dead, and they would bring them to the hospital. Some days, as a photographer, there are days when you feel courageous and days when you're scared. And frankly, on the days where I couldn't handle the battle, I would stay at the hospital and photograph the wounded coming in. The rebels couldn't understand why they were being killed. It was strange because they were doctors. They were not professional fighters. They didn't see themselves as an armed militia. They saw themselves as part of the uprising. The difference, of course, was that they were armed, but they were very confused as to why Gaddafi was killing them. This is a 9-year-old boy who was killed while he was out herding with his family. This is in the morgue. On this particular day, there were 11 men lied out in the morgue, and this is the father of the man. This is at the outside of the oil refinery at Ras Lanuf. The front line continuously shifted between various cities, Brega, Ajdabia, Ras Lanuf. So we worked with that front line, and as it sometimes cities would fall into the hands of the government, and then they would fall into the hands of the rebels. So we just stayed behind the rebel line and would cover those cities as they would fall back and forth. As the rebels would lose ground, they became more hostile to the journalists. They stopped giving us access at a certain point. This is on a particular night when we had been staying in a hotel actually in Ras Lanuf. The whole city was abandoned, and when we went in to cover the fighting west of Ras Lanuf, there was a hotel, actually a very nice hotel, and for any journalist who's covered a war, if you can find a bed and electricity, it's a coup. And so we stayed in this hotel, but we were awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they said, Gaddafi's coming, get out. So we packed our bags and left the city very quickly, and this is before dawn. The rebels had an anti-aircraft fire. It was continuous. They were firing up into the air for the airstrikes. This is a scene when, at the front line, when you hear jets coming in, basically everyone just looks up into the sky and waits for bombs to fall. And there is no protection. This particular bomb landed about 150 meters from where I was standing. Mom, don't listen. It was terrifying because there was really nowhere to hide. I mean, you just really hope that they didn't land on top of you. I'm showing this picture because I wanted to tell a little story. When one day I was traveling with Andre Leon, a photographer who I think is still in Libya, and we were back in the city of, I think we were in Ras Lanuf, and he said, do you want to go towards the front? And I said, yeah, well, Tyler, my colleague, is way up front. I said, so I don't want to go too far forward, but I'll go up with you, let's take a drive. So we started driving towards the fighting, and as we all got out of the car, and we said, okay, we'll work very quickly and then go back to the city. So the minute we got out of the car, artillery started landing around us. And so everyone started scrambling and ran back towards the car. And I realized I had dropped my BlackBerry in the middle of this terrain. And so I'm looking for my BlackBerry, and there are mortars falling all around me. And there are 3 rebel soldiers standing there looking at me, and they say, what? I said, my telephone. And I said, if you find my telephone, bring it to the hospital. And literally, it's in the middle of all of this terrain. And they said, okay. So I go to the hospital with my friends, we leave, and I get to the hospital, and about an hour later, a rebel shows up holding my BlackBerry. I couldn't believe it. I mean, people always ask me if in war you see humanity, and yeah, I mean, that was This is a site, rebels fleeing the front line. A sight that you see very often when you cover Libya. That's it.
I'm Spencer Platt, and I'm with Getty Images. Thank you, Ron, Lynsey, Bob. Thank you, Epoch Times. This is fantastic what you've done. Strangely enough, I should be in Libya right now because I was. The night before Chris and Tim were killed, my boss called me and said, you know, you're going to replace Chris. So it's you know, a powerful, a lot of emotions since then, obviously, and they're 2 dear friends, and I'll miss both of them greatly. I guess we'll get this set up. I'm the PC guy, so please bear with me if things don't go perfect. But I was before this whole Arab Spring, as people call it.